Hello and welcome to this screencast on debates in psychology, particularly centering, I suppose, on the OCR A-level specification, and we're looking at the psychology as a science debate. Okay, so for a long time, psychology has sought a position in the world of science, and this is really the debate which is been sort of generated over the years. Really, there are two main positions, two extreme positions in the debate. Either psychology is a science, yep, and a lot of people think that's a good thing, or it's not a science, it's a pseudoscience at best. Okay, so something that appears to be scientific but actually doesn't have the credibility of a science for many different reasons. Let's have a look at the particular reasons why psychology might be a science. So for instance, if you have psychological research which is systematic in nature, so if you think about systematic research, you're talking about things like laboratory experiments or even field experiments, etc., but things that have a planned out procedure, so something where there are standardized instructions and standardized procedures that can be replicated over and over again. Okay, so that's systematic. Yep. Objective as well. So the results from a piece of research shouldn't be something which is open to opinion, whereby someone has decided, oh yes, this is what they meant by such and such a thing. Okay, that would be a subjective set of results or set of assumptions. Whereas an objective understanding of science is when simply, well, there's no opinion at all. It's just simply one thing or another. Okay, you've got quantitative data usually, and that quantitative data is telling you whether a particular IV has affected something within an experiment. Okay, so it's objective, in other words. Is it falsifiable? So when we're talking about falsifiability, we're talking about things like hypotheses. Are you able to actually falsify them? Are you able to say that they're wrong? I've come up with a hypothesis and I've found via the process I've gone through that it's not correct. So there's nothing to back it up. You might think that's a strange thing to think of as scientific, but that is the whole basis on which science is based, the ability to prove itself wrong. Yeah, which sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? But that's really what science is about. Remember the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. So for psychology to be a science, it needs to be systematic, objective, falsifiable. Also needs to be replicable as well, coming back to the systematic nature before, yeah? So if it's replicable, that means that you can take a piece of research, you can do it again with a different group of people in a different situation, and you're going to get pretty similar results, most likely. Empirical investigation refers to, can something be measured, okay, in some way? Okay, can you actually measure it? In other words, for something to be scientific, for psychology to be scientific, there's no inferences, there's no looking at something which can't be seen in some way and trying to measure that, because it can't be measured. So for something to be scientific, it should be open to be measured in some way. And does it produce a theoretical explanation of behaviour? Okay, I think that stands on itself, doesn't it? What about pseudoscientific then? So if psychology is pseudoscientific, if it's not a science, okay, scientifically testable ideas that are taken on faith. Right, so a lot of the time you find in psychology that we have a set of ideas. I'm thinking particularly, say, about Freud. You've got your id, you've got your ego and your superego. Well, no one's ever found them, and no one's ever found the unconscious mind. But those assumptions are taken on faith, and then everything else comes from that. So you would definitely say that something like Freud, his ideas, the psychodynamic area, have they appear to be scientific, but actually they're pseudoscientific. Again, you can't falsify, not easily replicated, and not objective. It's subjective opinion, so isn't it? Even if tested and shown to be false. Okay, so again, you've got that idea coming forward there. So this is the debate, just to emphasize again, to whether psychology can actually be considered as a science or not. Okay, let's go through some of this then. So, psychology as a science, it is a research-based subject with investigation at its core, very similar to other sciences such as biology and physics. So that is an argument you could make. Yeah, so if you had a question which was about the psychology as a science debate, you could say, well, yeah, psychology is a science because it's research-based, has investigation at its core, it's very similar to other sciences. You could also say that it uses the scientific method in its investigations. Remember, we've mentioned that before, haven't we? Research is carried out through experimentation, using controls, cause and effect relationships are established. That's really important, yeah? It's what makes it scientific. And like other sciences, psychology has theories. Theories generate hypotheses, and these are tested empirically, yeah? So that the theories are tested and refined. So again, all of those things relate back to this, don't they? They say that psychology is scientific. However, if you take the other side of it, you can look at psychology and say, well, actually, it's not terribly scientific, and these are the reasons why. One of the big reasons is that we study humans. It cannot be investigated in the same way as subject matter that you might have in chemistry or physics. You can't put, a human in a test tube and expect them to or do anything else but try to get out, I guess. But people are aware of being investigated. Now, this is the big thing. If they're being investigated, they know that they're being investigated. A chemical in a test tube doesn't. Yeah. As a consequence of that, it will affect their behaviour. Yeah. So therefore, you can't say that psychology is a science just simply based on its test subjects. To make psychology less of a science, it means humans will always have extraneous variables which will affect their behaviour. This will lessen the cause and effect. It could just be something to do with the people. They've worked it out, they've decided to behave in that way just because they know they're being observed. Much of psychology is about the mind. Let me move this down a little bit. This is highly subjective. Remember, we said that psychology, to be a science, should not be subjective, it should be objective. And therefore, it's not open to scientific research because it is not actually observable. So, in other words, there's an awful lot of inference goes on. Psychologists only infer what is happening rather than what is actually happening. Now, again, you might be thinking that's about Freud, and you're right to say that. However, what about cognitive psychology as well? Yeah, these mediating processes that go on in the brain, they're not readily available to be observed, are they? There's an awful lot of inference occurs there. Psychological findings are always based on probabilities, therefore psychology is not science as it finds probabilities, not facts. That's a bit harsh. Most sciences do that, okay? But again, you could say that that would be a reasonable argument against psychology being a science, right? Now let's have a look at some of the scientific and less scientific ways in which we might go about experimentation within psychology. So these are the more scientific ones, okay? So lab experiments, field experiments, you get the idea. Anything which produces quantitative measures which can be replicated, which can support or disprove hypotheses are fine. These ones here, though, these require some sort of subjective analysis, don't they? So case studies, self-reports, content analysis, etc. Okay. So I've pretty much covered it there. I'll leave the rest of that on there for you. Might be useful for you to have a little. Read through, and you can see the linked debates, etc. Okay, but I don't intend to spend any more time on that. Go back and forth as often as you want to. Remember, what are the actual criteria for something to be scientific? What does it mean for it to be not scientific? What makes psychology less scientific? Okay, and these are the things you need to be thinking about when you have a question looking at psychology as a science in this area. Well, I hope that's useful for you.